We all know how short life is. After all, the mortality rate is still tracking at 100%. Even though this life is short, we still don't want it to suck. This podcast is all about tools and insights from psychology, philosophy, and spirituality to help this journey suck less. In fact, we may even learn how to embrace the life we have while creating the life we want. I'm Morgan, and this is the PS We Expire podcast. I'm so glad you're here. This was a year of firsts. December 4th was the 1 year, what I'm calling Anni-versary. So the 1 year anniversary of Annie's death. And this week, I just wanted to talk about what this last year has been like. And I was really tempted to do, like a really points 1, 2, and 3 and keep things like super organized and a logical conclusion and really straightforward. And instead, I just have my notes app on my phone just full of random notes about what this last year has been like. And that's a pretty good way to describe in a nutshell, like what it's been like. It's just like this kind of swirly whirlwind of thoughts and emotions and not really knowing what to do, I guess. And so I have just a handful of notes written down of like things that I want to talk about from this last year. And before I dig into this, if you're new here, I will tell you a little bit about Annie. And the least interesting thing about her is the disease that she had, which is what she died as a result of having. But I'll at least give you a little background so that you know what she was like, what she is like. It feels weird still to talk about her in a past tense, and I catch myself doing that, and I change it fairly often too, that it's still her. That one of the weirdest things to navigate is when people ask me how many kids I have, or when I'm volunteering information about my family, and it feels weird to say like 3 but 2, or 3, and if they ask questions to, tell them that Annie died. I don't know, it's super weird, and it feels, I guess it doesn't feel weird for me to talk about it, but it feels like it would be uncomfortable and weird for the other person to all of a sudden be thrust into a conversation about somebody's dead kid. So I still don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. Anyway, so Annie was 14 when she passed away on December 4th, 2022, on a Sunday morning. She had Sanfilippo Syndrome, which is also Mucopolysaccharidoses type 3A, which is a neurodegenerative, and physically degenerative disease, which means that as her body was unable to break down cell waste because she was missing a particular enzyme, that over time, things just got worse and worse for her. So unfortunately, she, over the course of her life, lost all the skills that she had gained in the first handful of years. So she was talking and running and eating everything in sight and lost all of those skills. So by the end of her life, she was not mobile anymore. She wasn't talking. She hadn't talked for probably 7 years. We had to work really hard to get her to smile or to laugh or maintain eye contact. She had a feeding tube. Yeah, and really, especially the last handful of years of her life, struggled with some serious movement disorders and seizures and all sorts of different things as her body just, it was getting harder and harder for her body to function as a result of the waste being built up in her cells. So it's in the family of lysosomal storage disorders. And I won't bore you by going into the details about what that is, but you can definitely look up, Sanfilippo syndrome on the Googles and find out more about that disorder. There are no cures. There are some promising clinical trials, but nothing that really came in time for Annie. So I was the primary person with her every day, and we thankfully had, for a long time, she was in the school system with some fabulous one-on-one help. And then we had help in our home for her for the last couple of years of her life, especially since COVID. She came home from school from COVID and didn't go back. But anyway, the last year of her life, she had to be hospitalized a couple of times in the pediatric intensive care unit with a respiratory infection. Once it was with COVID, and once it was just a result of a bad cold virus. So her body was really having a difficult time, particularly with respiratory illnesses. And when she got sick on a Monday, and we had already decided after her last stay in the ICU that we were not going to intervene by hospitalizing her the next time she got sick. And so she died at home. She got sick on Monday and she died on Sunday morning. Maybe at some point I will talk about what that was like. Not on this episode, but I remember for many, many years after her diagnosis, knowing that she was going to die and wishing that someone would just clearly tell me what to expect. And, I read a lot of stuff, and especially towards the end, as I was like wanting to prepare myself for wanting to know the signs of the end and wanting to know how to keep her comfortable and all of that. I wanted to make sure that I could be there with her. And so perhaps at some point I will share like really practically like what that was like to have her home with us, and what it was like seeing these changes in her body, and as she got close to the end. But not on this episode. Not on this episode. I can already feel the tears like starting to come up in my throat. A little tightness in my throat. And so there are some things that I won't be able to talk about today, but at some point maybe I will, as an offering of what would be helpful to people who are also navigating this, whether it's with a child or a parent. I went through this, obviously not the same circumstances, but with my dad. I was there the last several weeks of his life, and some similarities. He died almost exactly a year before Annie did, and oddly, that was like good preparation for what to expect with Annie. But anyway, so that's the intro to Annie and her disease. I guess that's the intro to her disease, but I'll tell you about Annie. Annie was straight up old soul. Like, she was wise beyond her years. She was this like magnet for beauty and magnet for beautiful people. I met some of the most amazing, compassionate, kind people as a result of them working with Annie, or just being like drawn to her. She was, when she was a kid, when she was little, she was just like a tank. She was super rambunctious, a big, strong kid with this like amazing little gravelly voice and laugh. And she just was fun. She was a fun kid. She ran everywhere. She was so fast. She ran everywhere. And as she got older and as the disease progressed, man, I can remember so many times of silence with her where like I would just stare in her eyes, and there's nobody else in the world really that I feel comfortable maintaining eye contact with that long. I think it was just like this wide open acceptance of life. That was one of the hallmarks of Annie. It was like she was there for it, for all of it. And there was like such a beautiful lack of resistance to what was happening. She was just such a present kid. And I remember times too where she would just be sitting in front of me, leaning against me, in her hair. She had blonde hair, and the sun would just catch it right, and it would just look like spun gold, just like glinting in the sunlight. I missed having her physical presence and her weight leaning against me. I miss that a lot. Annie is connected to the bigger story for sure. She's my greatest teacher for what it means to love everybody. Like there wasn't anybody that Annie wouldn't have been around. And this was like we had so many times when we would just be out in public and she, because of her lack of awareness of, like social norms or things that were okay, she would just like grab food off of people's plates in a restaurant, or we'd be standing in line somewhere and she would just reach out and like grab their clothing or grab their hand. And it was like nobody was a stranger to her. It's just everything was interesting to her, and people were just part of the equation. And so many people just were drawn to that with her incredible openness and this childlike wonder that just stayed with her forever. Anyway, so part of this first year, we had her funeral, her celebration of life, a couple months after she passed away. So because we had her cremated, so there wasn't like a rush to do like an open casket funeral or anything like that. So we did a celebration of life a couple months after, and that was such a that was such a weird experience because I had in my mind that like I wanted it to be something that was focused on Annie, like not on her death, if that makes sense. I didn't want it to be all like sad and gloomy because that's not how Annie was. But I also wanted to create an environment where people could grieve and be sad, and that I knew it wasn't just about me. I knew that it wasn't just about my experience of Annie, but there were many, many people who just needed a place to like talk about how sad they were that she was gone. So that was an interesting experience. And I do kind of wonder, like, why do we do services so close to when someone passes away? Because like the people who are closest to that are in such deep grief that it almost feels not cruel, but it almost feels just weird that we do these these services or these events like so close to someone's death. There's that is something that I like have kind of noticed too about the culture that we live in, is there's not a lot of ritual that has been created around death. There are some cultures that have tried and true timeless rituals and ceremonies and practices that people do when someone dies. And we don't really have that in Western culture in the United States. And there's something really beautiful about this idea of having ritual, because when you have a ritual, there isn't so much decision making. It's like, this is what we do. And there's a lot of comfort in that. Anyway, I don't have to go into that now, but coming back to this year of firsts. So this year we had our first Christmas without Annie, which was, 21 days after she passed away. 3 weeks after she died, we had our first Christmas without her. We had her first birthday. That was hard. That was a really hard day. We had our first summer break without her, and our first big family vacation without her. And this Christmas is our second one without her, which somehow feels harder. Like I think that's the weird thing about this milestone of it being a year. It's like, should I be further along in my grief than I am? Do I still have I don't actually think that, because grieving is a deeply personal process, and then there are some people who are going to hit different stages at different times. So I don't really think that about myself, but I think it's more so like this. I have this question of, are people still going to be as empathetic and understanding when I've like crossed that threshold of the year where maybe I should be able to be back to normal with some things and I'm just not? Are people going to still extend an understanding and compassion and empathy for how I'm doing on this side of the year mark, on this side of that milestone? I would like to believe that, yeah, they are, because I don't think that people are, mean and like, you should just get over it already. Thankfully, nobody has said anything like that to me. That would be extremely hurtful. But I do wonder if, like my continued turning down of invitations to do things or spending a lot of time with people or whatever, like I still don't feel up to that. I still don't really feel like I want to be out and about doing a ton of stuff, and I'm home a lot, really tucked into like just my little bubble right here, and I don't know if I'm ready to venture out beyond that as much as I used to. And here's a weird thing too, is like I'm an introvert anyway, and so I'm not a huge like be around people all the time kind of person. And Annie was kind of my like recognized excuse to not go do a lot of things. It was like that was the acceptable reason for me to not be out and about. And now I don't have her. And so is it okay for me to just say I'm not going to do that because I don't want to? I don't know. I mean, it is, but it's just like that new navigating that. The best way that I can describe how this last year has been is that yeah, it's a whirlwind. I read in this little grief pamphlet, this like metaphor of throwing confetti into a fan and just like everything scattering everywhere. And that is pretty accurate to how it feels. Like I've had a really, really difficult time concentrating on things, maintaining focus on things. I feel a lot more scatterbrained. I feel like I forget things a lot. Like the other day, I was I was taking things. We have like this area in our laundry room where we put things that we're going to get rid of, we're going to donate. So I was taking things from that and putting it in my car because I have to do that when the kids aren't home. Otherwise, they see the boxes and they see the things I'm getting rid of. And then all of a sudden, the toy that they haven't thought about for 2 years is their favorite toy ever. And how could I be such a monster to get rid of it? Anyway, so I'm putting things in my van, and somehow then I moved on to a different task. But then later I was walking past the living room and I looked out through my front window and my van tailgate was still up because I had only got like halfway through that task before I got distracted doing something else. And maybe this is normal, but this isn't normal for me. I am dealing with a level of distractibility and lack of focus and lack of concentration that I didn't have before. I definitely am a lot more tired. I've been taking a lot more naps. Some days it's difficult to kind of drag myself out of bed. I have gained weight, like 15 pounds, and it's been this is like, oh, I could do a whole nother podcast on this. When you feel like your body's not cooperating and like maybe it feels a little bit like an enemy or like a foreign thing, like I don't understand what's happening, and I'm chalking it up at this point, chalking it up to stress and chalking it up to just what physiologically is happening with grief and anxiety and sadness and loss, and that there are hormonal things that are happening as a result of just being so sad and having so much energy directed toward learning how to do life this way that just gained weight. And it doesn't really seem to matter, like that I'm eating differently and still maintaining a workout schedule. It's like it's just hanging on. And last night I was talking with my body and basically telling it like, thank you for trying to insulate me from pain. And I know that that's like I don't know, maybe too much of a psychological way to look at it, but it was really helpful for me in that moment to stop, at least for a little bit, like stop viewing my body as an out of control kind of enemy and say to it like, okay, this is there's a lot of hard things. And if my body is trying to create a buffer to create like a safe cocoon space here and put distance between my inner world and my outer world. I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but it's an interesting way to think about it. Anyway, so again, with the like lack of concentration, I also have like a huge loss of motivation. This was difficult when I had schoolwork that needed to be done, and I would just, kind of hit a wall of motivation, and I couldn't pump myself back up into doing it. And so some things have just had to be let go. Some things just have had to be less than what I would have normally, the effort that I would have normally put into it. I just have had to be like, okay, like I literally don't have it. I don't have it right now. This last year has felt pretty foggy. And I think the overarching thing that has felt like is just like a dream, almost like waking up out of anesthesia. Sometimes I feel like, was Annie a dream? I know it's been a year, and sometimes it feels like it's only been a couple of months. And sometimes it feels like, did she even exist? Like, I've got this picture on my desk of her. It's my all-time favorite picture of her. And sometimes I look at that and I think, like, I can't, I'm having a hard time remembering. And that sucks. That feels terrible. It feels terrible to not have the memories be close enough to access really quickly. And I don't like that some things hurt less, if that makes sense. Like the acuteness of the pain was a reminder that it was real. And sometimes even though things are less painful now, like that, there almost is like pain in it being less painful because I want to remember. I don't want to forget. And even if there's some relief in forgetting, I don't want that relief because I want her. This, I wanted to make sure I set a little time aside to talk about regret. Regret, regret is inevitable. It's inevitable because we happen to be a species that can play the what if game. I don't, as far as I know, there aren't any other organisms that do this. It's just us. And so as a result of that, like this byproduct of being able to play the what if game is a feeling of regret. And I have thought a lot about, what if we had taken her to the hospital? What if she did need, a trach, but that would have given us another 5, 10 years with her? What if with a round of antibiotics, she would have gotten over it? So many times I've thought about that. And the way that I deal with it is I just let myself feel it. I just let myself feel in the regret, the yearning, the longing for her to still be with me. The regret just tells me, "Ugh, I wish things were different." And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. So if you if you and when you feel regret in your life, whether it is about something that maybe seems small or something that's big. I think probably the areas where we feel the most regret are in our relationships, where we, maybe wish that we had repaired a relationship, or we had told someone that we loved them, or even that regretted that we didn't stand up for ourselves, or, any number of things that we wish that we would have done differently. When you feel those feelings of regret come up, don't push them away. Just let them be. Let yourself feel in your body what that feels like to long for things to be different. And I really believe that it's never too late. It's never too late to repair. So, I've heard people say the last 10 years, or the last few years of their relationship with their parents has been the best it's ever been, but their parents have been dead for 10 years. And I think what I like about that is like understanding that our relationship to people, so much of it is internal. So much of it is internal. And so as I'm dealing with my regret around Annie's life and Annie's death, and things that, oh man, things that I feel so much deep shame about, even especially when she was little. And I think probably every parent can empathize with this, where you're like, "Ah, I wish I would have done that differently." Anytime I have those feelings bubble up, I sit with them and I let them be. I let myself feel them, and I have so much compassion for that part of myself that wishes I would have done things differently, or maybe not. Maybe I wouldn't have done things differently, but letting that just be an indicator that I wish that she was still with me. I wish that I still had her. Another big series of milestones has been getting rid of her things, giving away her stuff, bagging up her clothing. I just donated in that Goodwill trip where I forgot halfway through that's what I was doing. I just donated in that trip, over a year later, I just donated 2 big bags of clothing and her special little zipper shoes. We donated her bed to another family whose child has Sanfilippo Syndrome, and her stroller. And that felt really good. I mean, it still sucked to get rid of it. It sucks so much. But it felt right for it to go to another child that needed it as much as Annie did. I still have the bottom drawer of my dresser that is full of clothing that I am not ready to get rid of yet. It's the shirts that I had her in the most, or my very favorite picture of her, the little cute shirt dress that she's wearing. I haven't gotten rid of that. There's some things that I'm not ready to yet, and I know that when I'm ready, I will get rid of them, or they will, have a different function, or I'll find someone to give them to, but I'm not ready yet. But getting rid of her things has been super duper weird. And then there will be times like yesterday, or no, earlier this week, Ryan was working on replacing a drain in our bathtub, and he was like, "Do we have, like something we can scrub? I need to scrub this out." And he was like, "Oh, can I use this scrub brush?" And he held it up, and I was like, "No, you can't use that. We need that." And then I realized the only reason why we would need it, the only reason why we had it, and the only thing it was ever used for was to clean out the tubes that we used when we did Annie's feedings. When we fed her through her G tube, we used these long, tall syringes, and that's what that scrub brush was used for. And so, yeah, you can use it to scrub out the disgusting bathtub drain, because I don't need it for part of her feeding supplies anymore. And that was terrible. That felt really awful. So there's always going to be something like that that comes up. I mean, the other big thing that feels so weird is like our van. we bought this van because the seats, you can fold all of the seats flat and you don't have to like physically take any of these seats out. So it's a Chrysler Pacifica with the stow and go seats. And so the seats fold down into the floor. And we bought it specifically for two reasons. One, because it was low enough to the ground that we could lift Annie into it and not, kill our backs doing that, which we did anyway, but it was low enough to be able to get her in her chair without hurting either of us. And then when we were out and about, we could put a seat down and we could change her diaper in the car, or we could feed her in the car. Previously we had we had a vehicle that we would, have to change her with the tailgate open. And that was like, no privacy. And if it was raining and cold, we couldn't really do that. And so that van was like a big thing. But now, now we have two kids, and I feel ready to not have that van anymore. And it sucks to get rid of it. It sucks. I don't know if it'll ever not suck. It probably won't ever stop sucking. Okay, I have a couple more things on my list. One is like the people ask me a lot, like, how are your other kids doing? Luke and Emma. So Luke's 8 now and Emma's 12. And how are they doing? I don't know. I don't know. Mostly I don't know how to answer this. I do know how they're doing because I check in with them a lot. Um, they both definitely have majorly different ways that they are processing their sads and their feelings. And I keep reminding myself that the best that I can do really is like just be available if they want to talk, and that I can continue to share with them when I'm having a really hard time, or when something is particularly difficult, or when I'm missing Annie a lot, or when I see a picture come across on the memories on my phone or on Facebook. Sometimes I'll invite them in to look at it with me. So, I mean, I guess the best that I can do is just like keep the lines of communication open, where they know that if they need to, that they can come and talk to me about how they're feeling and how they're doing. But I think they're doing okay. I don't know. I suspect that as they become adults and they have more language around what this experience has been like for them, and have more insight, more introspection, that they may be able to, in retrospect, like talk about what this was like. But for now, yeah, for now, I think they're okay. And Ryan too. I won't share his story. It's not mine to share, but I would say overall, like we're all doing okay. I have been, especially in those first couple of weeks after Annie died, I was like so desperate to see any signs from her or to have her show up in my dreams. Been so desperate for that. And the way that Annie, and I didn't really see much in those first couple of weeks. And I don't know if it was because of like how hard I was looking for it, because this is what I have found in the subsequent months, is that it's the times when I'm not looking for it that something will happen where I'm like, oh, hi, Annie. Hi, Annie. I'll give you a couple of my favorite for instances. So Annie, one of my things with Annie is rainbows. And so, like obviously if I see like a rainbow during a rainstorm, I'm like, "Oh, yes, a rainbow. That's great." But it's also like a very predictable and expected place to see a rainbow. So what I'm talking about is like times when I see a rainbow where I'm like, "That doesn't make any sense." I'm seeing it right now, or like that's a big surprise or something like that. So this was, I don't know, a handful of months after she died, that I was walking down the hall, um, and I just caught a glimpse of something in the carpet right next to the threshold from the hallway into her bedroom. And I was like, what the heck is that? I didn't know what it was. And so I stopped and I reached down and picked it up, and it was one of Emma's earrings that was a rainbow. And not only did I not even know that she had that earring, I don't remember her having that, but also, like, I love that it was just on Annie's floor right there. And then I happened to see it when I was walking down the hall. So that's, something that just was a little out of its normal context. Like, hi, Annie. And another one, um, for her birthday weekend, we went up to Orcas Island, which is one of the islands off the coast of Washington as part of the San Juan Islands. And we took a family vacation there a couple of years ago or 3 years ago and, had Annie with us. And we'd always wanted to go back. It was such a great time together as a family, and so we decided that that's how we were gonna celebrate her birthday is by going up there. So we were up, um, on Orcas, and we were in the grocery store, and it wasn't on her birthday, but it was on one of the bookend birthdays. I can't remember if it was the day before or the day after, but we were in the grocery store and going through the checkout line, and the song that came on the radio was Justin Bieber's "Baby." Now, this song came out, like, a really long time ago, and it was one of Annie's absolute favorite songs. Like, this because it came out when she was still running around and singing and talking, and so she would just jump around and sing this song at the top of her lungs. And so, like, the fact that it came on in this, like, tiny little grocery store, this super old Justin Bieber song, while we're in a place where we're checking out and we could actually hear it, just kind of blew my mind, and it felt like Annie was hanging out with us. So there have been, lots of little instances like that where I've been surprised by the thing that shows up that just reminds me of her. And I'm not, super committed to the belief that this is her doing that, but I'm grateful nonetheless for the little signs and remembrances and memories that flood to the surface when I see these things. I'm always really grateful for that. She has come to me in my dreams a few times. I had one dream that was so weird where in my dream she was in her stroller and we were at a doctor's office and I was standing next to this like sliding glass door and it was a pharmacy in the hospital and I was telling them, "Hey, I thought that Annie had died, but she didn't. She's right here with me. I was wrong. Can you please I need you to reinstate all of the medications that I stopped. So all the medications that I told you we don't need anymore, we actually need, and I need you because I was wrong. I was mistaken. I thought she died and she didn't." And then in that moment in the dream, I realized that I actually was mistaken about that and that she actually had died. And that was a terrible, terrible feeling to have. Like remembering again that she had passed. It was awful. And it also when I woke up, I also was so grateful because like I got to have a dream with Annie in it. So it was worth the terrible realization that she had actually died to just spend those few moments with her in my dream. It's super weird. So I often long to have dreams about her. I want to have so many dreams about her and I want to remember them. Lastly, before I go, I will talk about a handful of things that have helped me cope, that have helped me move through the grief that sometimes is extremely overwhelming and that bubbles to the surface at super random times. I don't know what it is about Target, but Target always gets me going. Now, I live in an area where we don't have a Target here. The closest Target is about an hour and 20 minutes away. So I'm not there all the time. And maybe that has something to do with it. But I used to look for clothes for Annie at Target probably more than a lot of other places. I had to be like really specific about the clothes that I bought for her where, they couldn't be they had to be long enough because she had a super long torso that you wouldn't be able to see her diaper. Any pants had to be stretchy pants. She couldn't do the jeans. They couldn't have a lot of like sequins or like pom poms or anything like that on the front. It was nice to get a darker shirt because, if she was really drooly, I didn't want to have, stains right there. Anyway, so just a whole lot of criteria that went into the clothing that I chose. And I often found things that worked really well for her at Target. So I was at Target, this probably was 6 months ago, but I was at Target with Emma And we were just walking around the girls section because she was looking for clothes, and I just kept seeing things that I would have bought for Annie, and I just kind of lost it. So I had to go sit down by, the Target dog mannequin and just be sad and cry and be so sad that I couldn't buy clothes for Annie anymore. So there are times like that where it just kind of like, surprise, you're sad. Surprise, this reminds you of Annie. Surprise. And I'll continue to welcome those because, it's part of the grieving process. I know that, but sometimes it happens very, very inconveniently. Anyways, so what has helped? What has helped in the last year? One of the things that helps a lot is talking to people who know her really well. So people that worked with her, either in our home or in the school district, family members that spent a lot of time with her, just talking with them about her is so helpful because they know what I'm talking about and they can share stories with me that I haven't heard yet. I get to know Annie just a little bit more through their stories. So that's been really helpful. Taking breaks has been really helpful. Just like turning my phone off, letting myself sleep in, saying no to everything and just being at home or taking a big long walk, but like just taking breaks has been so helpful. Working out is also immensely helpful, even on the days that I really don't want to do it, because there are, physiological reasons why working out makes a positive impact in our bodies. The sweating it out, sometimes I'm really mad and I work out and I'm like, yes, like this feels really good. Get that worked out. And having the routine of that is really helpful to me as well. Meditation, going into those times when I can tap into my deep held beliefs that there is more beyond what I can see. And meditation helps me get into that like bigger picture state, if that makes sense, where I'm connecting to something that Annie's also connected with. And somehow I feel connected to her in those times. So meditation has been really helpful. And meditation also, I've talked about this on previous episodes. So even if you want to go back and listen to my episode on meditation, then you can understand more about what I'm saying with this. But like a meditation practice has helped me just be more present in all the other moments of my life, because meditation forces you to slow down the thinking, and it forces me to take a break from like all the swirly thoughts and just like, oh, it's like taking a psychological deep breath is what meditation feels like. And meditation played a really big role in my ability to be so very fully present in those moments when Annie was like actively dying. So meditation has helped a lot in my grieving as well. And the last thing that has been really helpful to me is just learning about grief and the brain. And maybe this sounds weird, like I'm pulling almost like the experience in my body of grief up into my logical brain. But what I really like about what I have learned about what exactly happens in our neurological wiring when we are grieving has been tremendously helpful to me, because it's almost like I will experience something and I'll be like, "Oh, this is totally normal," because I know that this is what my brain is doing. For example, when we think about grief as learning, like our brains are having to relearn what certain sounds mean, what certain smells mean. Our brains are having to relearn certain times of day that used to be set aside for other things. So for many months after Annie died, at night I would hear a thunk, and immediately my response was that Annie? because Annie had a lot of nighttime wakefulness, and she also had the majority, almost all of her seizures she would have at night while she was sleeping. And so I was used to having those sounds be an alert that Annie might need my attention. And it took many, many, many months. It still happens where that's my knee-jerk reaction. And so just knowing that, like, this is my brain that got really good at predictions, got really good at patterns, got really good at, like, if this sound happens, this is what that means. And so these connections are really fast and really tight. And it's taking time for those connections to be rewired and redirected to other things. And it's just helpful for me to remember that like there are actually physical reasons why things happen the way that they do and why grief happens the way that it does. I've been really surprised at like how quickly smells can activate certain memories or just make me think of Annie. Probably more than anything else, smells will do that, where I'll catch a sniff of something and be like, "Oh my gosh, like that took me right back to Annie," and maybe not even to a particular memory, but just her. Even like a yucky smell will just remind me of her, and I love it so much, and it also, it also sometimes sucks. So, um, but yeah, all those things have really helped me, and, I think the weirdest thing about all of this, thanks for sticking with me this long and hearing about this. Um, so I think the weirdest thing one of the weirdest things about all of this, about this last year, has been this, like, this tremendous upheaval of my sense of myself. Like, this almost like it's blasted apart a certain part of my identity, because so much of my time and my mental energy, my emotional energy was like orbiting around Annie. And then when I didn't have that star to orbit around anymore, it felt like, well, who am I? And I've got my other two kids. So, like, that piece of like my motherhood identity is intact. But this is like, this is a big thing to not know what to do with myself. And to also, it's not just that I lost Annie, but I lost that part of myself that was needed for her. And so now it's like, well, what do I do now? What do I do with those parts of myself now? Where else can they be utilized? Are they still needed? Who am I? And I think that's like probably what grief does to a lot of people, especially when you lose someone that is so close to you, is that you wonder who you are now apart from that person. And I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for that yet. And I don't know that I will. And that's okay. Like, I read, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I'll share it with you because it was helpful for me. I was reading the autobiography of um Berch and Russell. So Berch and Russell was a phenomenal mathematician and philosopher in the late 1800s, early 1900s, just real genius. And his autobiography is funny and, discusses his childhood and how he got to where he was and the things that he was exploring. And um, just this one sentence, this one word in this one sentence caught my attention. And I've been thinking about it a lot. He was talking about like how to orient his life around the things that he really enjoyed doing. And this is the phrase that he used, is um that he was orienting his life around his purposes. And I don't know why, but it just like leapt off the page to me, this word purposes, because there's this belief that's floating around in, self-improvement circles and that we have to find our purpose. We need to know what our purpose is. What is our soul's purpose? What is our life purpose? And just in this phrase, purposes, it relieved all of this pressure on me to like find out what the singular thing is that I'm supposed to do. And instead made it like there are many, many things that you're supposed to do. There are many, many things that you can be interested in. There are many, many things that can click into those spots in your soul, in your innermost person that feel like purpose, that feel like intention, that feel like they're things that you are meant to do. It doesn't have to be any singular thing. And that felt like a relief somehow, that in this upheaval of my identity that was centered around a big part of my identity that was centered around Annie, even though there is still such a huge part of my identity that's centered around Annie, I don't have to be worried about finding out what my purpose is now. It's like, no, no, no. There are many, many things that we are meant for. And we don't have to be so fixated on like finding what that is. We just have to follow what excites us. We get to be more like Annie, where she just got to lean into the things that she enjoyed and that she really could care less about what other people thought about that. And that is what made her one of the things that made her such a magnetic person, was that you just got to see this being who was full of life, absolutely bursting at the seams with life. And even as her disease whittled away the outward expression of her inner life, it didn't diminish her inner life at all. It didn't diminish her inner light, and it didn't diminish her purpose or her purposes. She had many, many purposes. And I am certain that Annie did everything that she was meant to do. Every single thing that she was meant to do, she accomplished. And I'm just happy that I'm happy that I got to be a part of that. I'm happy that I got to orbit around her and be close to her warmth and be close to her brightness and be close to her life. This year has been terrible and wonderful and growing and exhausting. It's been all of those things. And I heard another grieving mother say this, and I resonate with it 100%, that one of the greatest gifts was Annie being born, and the second greatest gift of my life was her death. And realizing that doesn't make me miss her less. It just is like a truth about the power of being with her through that transition from this life into the next. That was by far one of the most profoundly beautiful and powerful experiences of my life. I guess that's all I got for today. Thanks for being with me on this journey. Thank you for listening to conversations like this, where just talking about really hard stuff. You're really courageous for being in it, for listening to this conversation. And I don't take it for granted that you're here. And I also feel really glad for you that you get to have like a secondhand experience of Annie. If you didn't get to know her in real life, I'm sorry, you really missed out. She's super awesome. And if you only are getting to meet her secondhand via this podcast or any of the other places that I typically hang out online. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you get to meet her in this way. Mm. So thank you for being here. And before we go, P.S. We expire.